5 months, the index increased. Lawrence, is this trend likely to continue?
I believe so, because we are creating jobs, and amazingly, mortgage rates still continue to remain low rather than increase, even though Federal Reserve has clearly indicated that there will be tightening monetary policy in the upcoming months and going into next year. So as long as the interest rates rise moderately and jobs creation continues, I anticipate that the signing of the contracts and the closing of the transactions will be occurring at an increasing pace.
We are also seeing that the median home price continues to increase, which in turn would increase household net worth. What does that mean for the American consumer?
Very good news on the home prices. So rise in home price means that most Americans are beginning to see a recovery in their overall wealth situation, because still about 2/3 of families have their wealth principally tied to their home values. But we have to remember that with this a recovery, we have yet to hit a new peak. After the price decline, we're still steadily climbing out. And based on the projection of likely home prices over the next few years, we will not likely hit the new peak until year 2016 when we hit. Yet the household net worth overall is at an all-time high by a measurable amount, and that is being driven by the stock market wealth gains. But the stock market wealth gain principally goes to the 10% of families who have meaningful investment in the stocks. So we have a situation where home values are recovering, not yet a peak, yet household wealth is at an all-time peak because of the stock market.
Lawrence, what is your forecast for the next 6 to 12 months?
On the next 6 to 12 months, I see the home sales steadily improving, but home price appreciation in the mid or low single-digit rate of appreciation, because the inventories are rising, and furthermore, the housing start is beginning to ramp up, which means that we have more inventory in the pipeline that will appear over the next, say, 6 to 9 months. Therefore, the direction of the housing is that increased sales, but at a more moderate pace. If I can also just comment on the very high net worth, is that the consumer confidence is recovering, but the increase is only aligned with home values and not with the stock values. And I think what the reflection of that is that, again, most Americans' wealth are tied to their home value rather than with the stock value. And furthermore, even the wealthier households, they empathize with the younger homeowners, and right now we are at essentially the lowest home ownership rate among the young people, and hence I think that is holding back some of the recovery in the consumer confidence, even though, interestingly, America's net household wealth is at an all-time high.
This Week in Economics on the 31st of August 2014. Numbers Man here. This is our last program for the month of August. You just heard from Dr. Yom. He's with the National Association of Home Builders, an organization that has an interest and collects statistics on housing starts. We'll do an interesting broadcast. We'll start with housing, and then we'll deal with consumers and personal income. And at the last part of the show, we'll talk about deficits. We have a little bit from Dr. Ellendorf, the director of the Congressional Budget Office, and he'll be talking about what the deficit is and where it will go and how they got there in terms of projecting it, where the Affordable Care Act blends into it. But first, let's get the housing out of the way. Dr. Hume talked about it in some general terms. One thing to remember here, most Americans have their wealth in their homes, which will say the average value is at around from the high 300,000s to the 500,000s, basically, and not in, say, stocks, which have been doing well, about 10%, according to him. I've seen various numbers on that. But what is happening when you see the economy is doing well? Well, yes, the market is doing well, and we'll get to the market lastly here, where it is in those terms. But in the real estate market, it's a little bit different. First of all, interest rates are low. but the credit selection process is not fair to all parties involved. In fact, we still have a large number of foreclosed properties out there that have been held back, and they're coming onto the market gradually, and those are being affected. Also, the settlements from the large banks, Bank of America comes to mind here, and many people still losing their homes have not been covered by various parts of that settlement. So those are some of the issues that are out here. Let's get to the housing part of this equation. It's not simple. When people talk about it, the economy, there is lots of problems because you had a depression, and now the country's in a post-depression stage, but that does not mean everything is rosy. It does take a very long time to get things back to what they normally would be. And when we talk about normally what they would be, we're talking about 2014 ongoing. We're not talking about what happened 10 years ago. This is to be understood, and this is where a lot of the confusion is out there. Let me just get a little from that report. It was dated on Thursday. Pending home sale index, that's a forward-looking indicator based on contracts, climbed 3.3% to 106.9 in July from 102.5 in June. But still 2.1% below July of 2013. It was 108.2 at that particular time. The index is its highest since August of 2013 was 207.1, which is above 100. Considered an average level of contract activity for the third consecutive month, so above 100, okay. Inventory is its highest level since 2012, August that would be 2 years ago. The increase in numbers of new and existing homes for sale is creating less competition, is it giving prospective buyers more time to review their options before submitting an offer. In the Northeast, the PHSI jumped 6.2% to 89.2 in July. This is 8.3% above a year ago. In the Midwest, the index marginally fell to 0.4%, fell 0.4% to 104.6 in July, and is 6.4% below July 1 year ago. Pending home sales in the South increased 4.2% to an index of 119 in July. This is 1% below a year ago. So in other words, a year ago they were 120. The West rose 4% in July to 99.5%, but remains 6% below July of 2013. UM expects existing home sales to be down 2.1% this year to 4.98 million, compared to 5.09 million sales existing homes in 2013. The national median existing home price is projected to grow 5 or 6% this year and 4 or 5% next year. This kind of squares with what Dr. Ellendorf is talking about. The budget has been decreasing there, and some other factors. It's still above average, but part of the problem is the deficit, I should say. Part of the problem here is what you consider to be the average. Now you have to understand that the depression of 2007, 2008, and ongoing had never been seen in modern times in terms of modern analytics. The Great Depression we had in the 30s, but we did not have modern analytics. We were basically a paper and pencil ledger-driven operation. There were, of course, calculators above the abacus, but at the same time, the metrics that you had were not very good metrics. So when people start talking about the normalization, which started after the Great Patriotic War, and then in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, and somewhat in the 80s, you're talking about an animal with different stripes totally. So this is where you have a lot of problems out there as far as what you look at. And this is where a lady wrote to me about this. This is where there's a lot of confusion as to what the norm is. The norm is not 1990. The norm is not the early 2000s. It has now become the norm of 2010, 11 to 14. And this is where you are, and this is where you remain. So in other words, when you look at it, growth is at a pace, but at a pace that can be sustained. Let me go ahead here. Total housing investment in July 2014 was 2.37 million existing homes available for sale, the highest since 2012, when 2.4 million were available. Pending home sales index is a leading indicator for the housing sector based on pending sales of existing homes. The sale is listed pending when the contracts have been signed. An index of 100 is the average number there. By contrast, the volume of existing home sales in 2001 fell in the range of 5 to 5.6 million, which is considered normal for the current population. And they'll have the existing home sales for August out on the 22nd of September. And the next pending sales index will be released on the 29th of September. So this is a sort of a little estimate of where things are and where the National Association of Realtors put things. But from his, one can say that houses are better than they could be, not terrific, and that has been the whole economy in a whole. Let's go look at some of the income numbers, and we'll get the rest of this sort of together here. This is from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. National income and product accounts, gross domestic product, second quarter, and this is the second estimate in corporate profits, Q214 preliminary estimate. Well, real domestic product, the outputs of goods and services, increased at an annual rate of 4.2% is in the second quarter, 2014, according to the second estimate released by the Bureau of Economic Analysis. In the first quarter, real GNP decreased at 2.1%. The GNP estimate released today is based upon a more complete source data than were available for the advanced estimate issued last month. The advanced estimate, the increase in real GNP was 4%, with the second estimate for the second quarter. The general picture of economic growth remains the same. An increase in non-residential fixed investment was larger than previously estimated, which the increase in private inventory investment was smaller than previously indicated. The increase in real GNP in the second quarter primarily reflects positive contributions from personal consumption expenditure, private investment inventory, exports. More and more exports are becoming an important part of the U.S. economy. Non-residential fixed investment, state and local government spending, residential fixed investment, imports were subtracted from the calculation of GNP increased. Real GNP increased 4.2%. We talked about that. In the second quarter, after decreasing 2.1% in the first quarter. The upturn in the percentage change in real GNP primarily reflects the upturn in exports in private inventory. The price index for gross domestic products, which measures prices paid by U.S. residents, increased 1.9% from the second quarter, the same increases in the advance estimate. This index increased 1.4% in the first quarter, excluding food and energy. Is always excluding. Incidentally, energy costs are down. This is our AAA estimate for the Labor Day holiday. It will be less than we've seen previously. Domestic purchases increased 1.7% compared with 1.3%. Real personal consumption expenditure increased 3.5% in the second quarter compared with an increase of 1.2% in the first. Durable goods increased 14.3% compared with an increase of 3.2%. Non-durable goods increased 1.9% in the second quarter. It was unchanged in the first. Services increased 0.8% compared with an increase of 0.1%. Real residential fixed investment increased 8.4% in the second quarter compared with an increase of 1.6% in the first. Investment in non-residential structures increased 9.4% compared with an increase of 2.9%. Investments in equipment, we always look at this, at 10.7% in contrast to a decline of 1%. Investments in intellectual property products increased 4.4% compared with 4.6%. Real residential fixed investment increased 7.2% in contrast to a decrease of 5.3%. Real export of goods and services increased 10.1% in the second quarter in contrast to a decrease of 9.2% in the first. Real federal government consumption expenditures and gross investment decreased 0.9% in Q2 compared with a decrease of 0.1% in Q1. National defense increased 0.9% in contrast to a decrease of 4%. Non-defense decreased 3.7% in contrast to an investment increase of 2.9% in contrast to a decline of 1.3%. Real final sale domestic product is GNP less charge in private inventories increased 2.8% in the second quarter in contrast to a decrease of 1% there. We get to purchases by U.S. residents of goods and services increased 4.5% in Q2 in contrast to a decrease of 4% in 1. Goods and services produced by labor and property supplied by U.S. residents increased 4.3% in Q2 in contrast to a decrease of 2.8% in the first quarter, Q1. GNP, including GNP excluded, net receipts of income from the rest of the world, which increased 7.8 billion in the second quarter in contrast to a decrease of 27.4 billion in Q1. In the second quarter, receipts increased to 4.2 billion. Payments decreased to 3.5 billion. Current dollar GNP, the market value of the nation's outputs of goods and services, increased 6.4%, or 267.3 billion in Q2 to a level of 11.3 billion. In the first quarter, current dollar GNP decreased 0.8% to 34.3 billion. So we basically had 11,301.3 billion. Interesting way of expressing it. Nonetheless, production of GNP increased 4.7% in Q2 in contrast to 0.8% decrease in Q1. Revisions. The upward revision to percentage change in real GNP primarily reflects an upward revision to non-residential fixed investment and a down revision to imports were partially offset by a down revision to private inventory. So, in the second estimate, the real GNP in the first percentage change from preceding quarter was 4% to 4.2, and current dollar GNP 6 to 6. Their corporate profits, and this is a capital adjustment, a consumption adjustment, increased 154.9 billion in the second quarter, in contrast to a decrease of 201.7 billion in the first. Tax on corporate income, 39.7 billion in the first quarter, compared with an increase of 66.9 billion in Q1. Profits after taxes increased 115.2 billion, in contrast to a decrease that would be in Q1 of 268.6 billion. Dividends decreased 1.3 billion in the second quarter, compared with a decrease of 39.5 billion in Q1. On distributed profits increased 116.5 billion, in contrast to a decrease of 178.9 billion. Net cash flow, internal funds available to corporations for investment, increased to 130.9 billion, in contrast to a decrease, in other words, more money there, of 163 billion. Domestic profits of financial corporations, 130.6 billion in Q2, in contrast to a decrease in Q1 that would have been 86.2 billion. Domestic profits of non-financial corporations increased 119.3 billion, in contrast to a decrease of 89.6 billion. So corporations made out like abandoned, basically speaking. The rest of the world's a component, something they've added. Profits increased 4.9 billion in Q2, in contrast to a decrease of 26 billion in Q1. This measure is calculated as the difference between receipts from the rest of the world and payments to the rest of the world. In Q2, receipts increased 4.7 billion and payments decreased 0.2 billion. Goods and service, gross value added of non-financial domestic corporation business in Q2, real value added and profit units. The increase in unit profit reflects the increase in unit prices and decrease in unit non-labor and labor costs. So that ends that particular segment. The next release will be on the 26th of September. Basically, all these things that come out about the 2nd. This will be the gross domestic product, second quarter. This will be the third estimate. Will come out in corporate profits, second quarter 14 revised estimate. So you can keep up with all these estimates. You're batting over, literally over 500. Let's move on here. From Bloomberg, we went round and round here. While improving job markets, lifting confidence is yet to spur broad-based increase in pay that will boost demand at retailers. That is from William Soner. And guess. The weak start for consumer spending, which accounts for 70% of the economy, prompted some economists to cut Q3 estimates, even as the data showed manufacturing was strengthening. Sorry about that. So basically, household purchases are expected to decrease 0.1% in July, the first drop in 6 months after rising 0.4% in June. Income rose at the slowest pace of the year. Excuse me. Savings climbed to the highest level since 2012. From Steppinger, a chief economist at Phelan's Microeconomics, that's in White Plains, this is not going to be a consumer-driven quarter. We need to see sustained payroll growth and wage growth. Well, That you're not seeing is a little bit different. You normally don't see that in summertime. This is one of the situations here. Anyway, nonetheless, the Bloomberg survey of 79 economists projected a decrease in consumer spending for last month. That was the medium forecast was 0.2% gain, and the range estimated from unchanged to 0.4% there. Incomes climbed 0.2% in July, smallest advance since December. Service spending, we talked about that. Outlays on service decreased 1.1. Summer weather has been quite mild this year, leading households to spend less on air conditioners. That is from Laura Rosner, an economist at BNBP. Savings rate rose to 5.7% in July, the highest since December of 2012. A pickup in manufacturing driven by gain in business investment would probably help make up some of the shortfall. We talked a little about that. Auto demand, we haven't talked about that. Cars and light trucks sold at a pace of 16.4 billion in July, down from 16.9 billion rate the prior month, was the fastest since July of 2006. That was before the Depression set in. So things are looking up there. People were buying automobiles. Big ticket items such as cars are doing well. As hiring picks up, employers added an average of 230,000 workers month to month so far this year, the strongest pace since 1999. Economists project an average of 220 through the end of the year. The release will come on September the 5th, something to talk about on our next report. And the picture consumers upbeat. The Thomson Reuters, University of Michigan, incidentally, Reuters is laying off themselves and reshaping and outsourcing parts of their IT department. But the workers there, I suppose the good news is, will remain working for the new place, no doubt with less benefits. Final sentiment index rose to 82.5% from 81.8% in July. The group reported the median projection of the Bloomberg economist was 80 after preliminary August reading of 79.2. So did a little bit better there. And from Mr. Richard Curtin, Dr. Curtin, since most of August's gain was driven by households in the top third income ladder as stock prices climbed. Dr. Jung talked about that, which is better. Curtin, the chief economist for the Consumer Sentiment Survey, said in a statement, those at the other end of the spectrum are still lagging. Well, they'll be lagging for a while and will continue to lag. The inflation report here, discounting is helping to contain inflation. Prices tied to consumer spending rose 1.6% in the year ending in July. Commerce Department showed Federal Reserve policy at 2%. The central bank isn't the only one falling short in its goal. Consumer prices in the Eurozone rose 0.3% in August from a year earlier. The central bank, of course, taking no action as European Central Bank, that is. So we move merely along there. On the international side, we have a number of things going on here. The Russian ruble has fallen, fell to 37.03 per dollar on Friday. Its worst valuation since the currency was restructured in 1998. The Federation has $400 billion in foreign country, in addition to weak performance of the economy. Relies on commodities as oil and gas. May be less willing now. Of course, those prices have went down. Stock prices have declined to 1.9% of there on the RST. That's the dollar index declined there. American bank Morgan Stanley said in a research report, escalation puts the invincibility of Russia into question. In our worst case scenario, involving full sanctions. A material portion of a listed market in Russia could become uninvestable. Well, that is moving more and more in that direction. The ruple's value is the lowest against the dollar since '98, when the currency was restructured 1,000 rubles into one new ruble. Now let's go to the other news here. Brazilian economy contrast by 0.6% between April and June. A revision in the first quarter pushes the country into a recession. And we'll go to that because in an election this will play into some of that. GNP fell, as we said, 6/10, and the recession is usually defined as 2 consecutive quarters of contraction. And according to most recent polls, Rousseff, the president there, is losing to an Afro-Brazilian named Marina Silva if the October election went to the second round. The World Cup held, as World Cups usually are, was not good for business. Same as many other things going on. A decade ago, that had been 10 years ago, Brazil was a darling of emerging economies. The country reaped the benefits of soaring commodity prices. Very different prices now. Investors in consumer confidence has fallen. The World Cup may have taken people's mind off the economic woes, but it went away very quickly. One other item before we do the numbers, we'll go to the Indian economy. The IMF, incidentally, has confidence in Madame Lagarde. She's the chair of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, but she's on investigation for when she was finance minister in France. The Indian economy grew by 5.7 in the 3 months to June, fastest pace in 2.5 years. That's from the Ministry of Statistics there. So we'll just leave it there. Short and very sweet. Euro inflation is near 5-year low at 0.3%. And Malaysian Airlines cut 6,000 people. Tesco shares drop on profit warning. They had an 8-year low there for Tesco. Now in Nigeria, let me just bring you up here. They're in the modern world. That is Mr. Gooden there. Good luck Jonathan, I'm sorry. Received the first biometric card which you can use to make electronic payments. A national electronic ID card. MasterCard is providing the prepayment element, and it hopes millions of Nigerians without bank accounts will now gain access to finance. An attempt to introduce national ID 10 years ago failed. They've been blamed on corruption. But nonetheless, good luck in his hat. His nice hat on there. Said combining an ID card with a payment card for those 16 older was a significant move, no doubt about that. MasterCard got the deal, and they move ahead. We don't have that in the U.S. The new ID shows a person's photograph, name, age, unique ID number, and 10 fingerprints that are scanned during the enrollment. So in other words, everything is there. They got you some biometrics there, and they basically got you. So we'll have a picture of that on our little marquee. Let's go and do the numbers here now. And what we have left will be go to Dr. Ellendorf. We don't want to go too long on this, but we'll do the stock markets very quickly here. The FTSE was at 13.95. These are Friday unless otherwise noted. And the DAC in Frankfurt was at 7.61. In Paris, they were at 15. In Brussels, they were down 3.84. In Madrid, they were at 6.60. In Zurich, at 36.74. In Moscow, and this was on Wednesday, at 1447.91. The RT we talked about, the RTS we talked about, it was down 29.26. That was on Friday. That's in Moscow, that index. In Johannesburg, they were also down 295.82. In Bombay, they was 77.96. In Karachi, 701.42. In Lahore, 313.96. In Colombo, 29.29. And on Wednesday in Tehran, down to 28.70. In Sydney on Friday, 3.30. The Nikkei was down 35.37. The Hang Seng, 1.06. In Shanghai on Friday, they were 21.38. The Dow in New York, up to a holiday here in the U.S., 18.88. The Nasdaq at 10.65. And in San Pablo, 997.28. And in Mexico, they're at 126.81. Numbers not looking badly there. We'll go to the commodities very, very quickly here. Brent crude futures were up 65 cents at 103.11 cents. The spot was up 11 cents at 102.97. West Texas crude was up $1.31 at $95.91. T-Boone Pickens still jumping for joy. He remembers $15 bail gold. Dubai gold, we don't have it, but I guess we'll have to go with the Forex Gold Index. Gold was down $2.25 at $1,285.95. This will basically do it here. Happy Labor Day holiday for everyone. Excuse me. We'll have special programming here at the Boston Red Network. Also, on Boston Red, we had Warren Buffett, All-American hero, or Benedict Arnold. That was around the transaction of Burger King and Tim Horton, a coffee shop donut operation in Canada, and the moving of their headquarters for financial reasons. The administrative thing will stay in Florida, but they will move their headquarters out of the U.S. and various machinations about that. Check that program out. We present both sides of it and a business case for that. So nonetheless, good day. And for those in business, have a productive week after the holiday. Consumer, evidently you kept your eyes on the ball.
Bloomberg News. Mr. Elmendorf, let me just begin with, for those outside of Washington, what is the Congressional Budget Office, and what's your takeaway from Wednesday's report?
CBO's role is to provide the Congress with nonpartisan, objective information about the budget and the economy. We've been around for almost 40 years, and our job is to just help the Congress understand what the consequences will be of current laws and also what the consequences would be of alternative policies that they're considering. One of the ways in which we try to meet that responsibility is to provide regular projections of the economy and the budget under current law. Yesterday we released our summer update to the projections we'd released earlier this year. What we found in reviewing the evidence about the economy and the budget is that the overall picture isn't much different from what it was in the projections we released earlier in the year. The economy, we think, is on a path of recovery, but it has been a disappointingly slow recovery. We do think now that growth will pick up over the next few years, and labor market will strengthen.
Americans, when they're polled, they feel like we're still in a recession. What is the disconnect between what people feel at home and these kind of numbers that we see? The stock market's obviously really high, but we also have almost 50 million people on food stamps. You know, what's going on right now?
Well, economists generally define a recession as ending when the economy stops contracting and starts growing again. But the economy contracted so much in this country in 2008 and especially the first half of 2009 that the actual output of the economy fell way below what we could produce if all of the people who wanted to work were back at work, if all of the plant and equipment businesses had was being used, and so on. So although the economy has been growing now for 5 years, it's been growing from a level that had fallen well below what we'd had before the downturn. And that growth that we've had has not been fast enough to put everyone back to work who wants a job. And you can see that partly in the unemployment rate, which, although it has come down quite a bit, is still higher than it was in 2007 and the years before that. But you also can see this in the labor force participation rate. This is just the share of the working age population that is actually employed or looking for a job. And that participation rate has fallen very sharply in 2010, 11, 12, and 13, although now it has leveled out since late last year. And we think part of that is underlying demographic trends, but part of that is people who became discouraged because they couldn't find a job. So we think that as the demand for firms' products increases in the next few years, the unemployment rate will come down further, but also some people will be drawn back into the labor force when they find better job prospects, and we think ultimately faster increases in wages.
Are wages the last thing to usually catch up in a recovery like this?
Wages can catch up slowly. This particular business cycle has been so deep and the recovery is so prolonged that whether the traditional patterns apply exactly in this recovery isn't so clear to us or other analysts. And that's part of the challenge that we and other people face in making projections. But wages tend to recover only when firms are finding that they're trying to hire more workers and can't get workers at the existing wages. And they haven't really come to that point yet.
What if that doesn't happen? What if these typical trends that you're looking for, what if they don't play out? And the wages stay stagnant, wages have not, or people are coming back to the workforce, but they're taking part-time jobs?
Well, if the wages don't pick up, then there will be fewer people who will come back into the labor force. Some people will decide that given the other costs they have of working or the things they would do if they weren't working, they won't actually find their way back to work. But also for many, many people who would be working, they would just have lower incomes than otherwise. For a long time in this country, the share of total income going to workers and the share going to the owners of capital through profits or interest payments, those shares tend to be fairly stable. And we've really deviated from that now. For a few decades, in fact, there's been a downtrend in the share of income going to workers. But that gradual downtrend turned into a sharp fall. And we have not seen recovery from that. Now, in our projections, we think there will be a recovery, not back to the previous average level, but a recovery from where we are now. And I think there's every reason to think that will happen, but it will take businesses feeling enough demand for the goods and services they're selling that they need to hire more workers to produce those goods and services. And in order to hire them, they'll need to feel the need to pay higher wages. We think that is coming, but it has not happened yet. Growth of wages remains quite subdued relative to what it was before the financial crisis and the recession.
Mr. Elmendorf, on economic growth predictions, almost every year it seems like CBO says the year after this there's going to be a sharp uptick in growth. Why should investors believe CBO this time when you say next year and beyond we're going to see a much higher rate of growth?
Well, everyone who looks at our economic forecast should recognize that there's a tremendous uncertainty about the forecast. One thing we do every few years is to publish an analysis of the accuracy of our forecasts. And we find that our forecast is no worse in general than the forecasts of outside forecasters. But that's a pretty low bar just because economic forecasting